fell out of a coconut tree. Go
Uh,
ahead and nib it.
we're now on the record. So, how
I
about the temporality?
yeah,
It's ecstatic.
It's
Got
ecstatic.
me ecstatic too.
I'm ecstatic about it.
Yeah, the horizontal horizontal unity of the ecstasies of temporality. That's what I'm all about.
I'm
That's
all
who I'm
about that.
going for.
Um, Nevin, if you have a kickoff question, I'd be willing to give you the floor, but I also have I have a lot of questions this time.
No, I'm happy to for you to do that. I mean, I have a lot of questions, but I don't know that any of them are particularly profound or anything. It's mostly what the hell does this mean or what the hell does that mean? So if you have something, go on ahead.
Well, I have a question in that vein, actually, precisely along those sort of formal lines, which is a what does this actually mean kind of question. Because I felt like there was this statement made in an early part of the reading that I knew when I read it, I was like, I need to understand this in order to get the rest of the reading. And I didn't quite get it. And so I felt that I was kind of missing something. And let me just see if it was pretty early on. So as far as I understood, and I always do this where I go through what I know and then up to what I don't know. But what I know, or what I think I know, is that Heidegger at the start of this reading of the temporality of discourse says, the there is articulated by discourse. Most often, this is a making present in language, and discourse itself is temporal in some way. And I was like, okay, all right. It's not just because speech and discourse occurs in time or temporally, but discourse itself is temporal in some way, whatever that means. All right, I was following. But then on the Macquarie Robinson, page 401, Heidegger, page 350, he makes a very clear, concise statement that I do not understand at all, basically at all. And it is on Heidegger 350, directly after the italicized section. The italicized section starts temporality temporalizes itself as a whole, blah, 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 doodle-do. The very next paragraph starts on Heidegger 350. Temporalizing does not signify that ecstasies come in a succession. The future is not later than having been, and having been is not earlier than the present. Then this next sentence is what really confused me. Temporality temporalizes itself as a future which makes present in the process of having been. Okay, that's his statement. I have a very straightforward question about this. What do you mean? And two, if I have any idea of what you mean, how is that different from the thing you just said it wasn't? Let's reread. I want to reread the whole paragraph. Temporalizing does not signify that ecstasies come in a succession. The future is not later than having been, and having been is not earlier than the present. Right? That's what he's saying. It's not. The second sentence is temporality temporalizes itself as a future which makes present in the process of having been. How is that functionally different from the thing he just said in the sentence prior? I don't understand the dichotomy he is illustrating, right? And further, I don't really know what it means for temporality to temporalize itself kind of at all. And I feel kind of a little embarrassed to admit that. But I do not know what he means by temporality temporalizing itself. And maybe it's because I missed something very critical, but I don't know. That's it.
I don't know what that means either. So I was, looking at that same sentence. I don't know what temporality temporalizes mean. Um, and I don't really understand that sentence either, like you said, but I think I'm wondering if that sentence is key to this notion of the ecstatic unity, because I, he keeps talking about the ecstatic unity of temporality, and and I'm not sure, but kind of going, maybe we're too much back in last week's discussion. We're in the having been, but, um, he was talking about this. How is Dasein unified? And he doesn't want to unify. He doesn't want to make the unity of Dasein a function of the subject. Like we talked about with Kant. The transcendental unity of a perception. I'm wondering, and maybe he said this explicitly again, and I missed it, whether this ecstatic unity is his answer to that, that unity of transcendental a percept, or of transcendental a perception, and that this sentence is somehow expressing that unity. But I don't really understand what the ecstatic, I kind of understand in that, each one of these, I don't know what to call them, moments, the having been, the present, the future, sort of, they not extend, but they exterior, I don't know what the word is. They throw themselves out into the other three moments. So they're ecstatic in that sense. And that somehow, because all three of them do this, that generates this some kind of unity. Yeah, they temporalize. And that unity, that ecstatic unity of temporalization is, I think, what he is claiming gives unity to Dasein. So one, is that correct? And two, I'm like Hunter, I don't really understand what that sentence means.
Yeah, I think by and large that is right. That okay, so what is this ecstatic temporality thing? It's still not super clear to me. Definitely don't quote me as some kind of authority on this. I'm not. If you quote me on something, that's just like really bad. Don't do it. Please don't. Uh, so the ecstatic aspect, going outside itself, and that's always connected with this unity of these three different modalities of time, which he just calls the ecstases, which is the having been, past, making present, the present, and then the future, projecting. And I think the ecstatic element of it is that you can take any one of those and it connects with the other two. And so that quote specifically, he's kind of highlighting the future, I think, in that sentence. Temporalized itself as a future which makes present in the process of having been. So I think that's exactly what he's doing there with saying that. So I think that kind of like the temporalizing itself, he's getting into the fact that it's kind of this constitutive action, a process. It's where he says, temporality isn't an entity, it's not a being. Instead, it's this activity of constitution. So in that, the future, and its temporalizing, it does so only as a unity with also this act of making present a certain kind of present, and also through a having been of the past. So a lot of the details of how exactly they're connected, that's where I become immediately confused. Although sometimes in this reading, there's a few places where he kind of gives a little more details about it, especially in terms of so when he talks about the world and the constitution of the world through these relations of involvement or reference, significance, the world constitution that way. And he talks about in order to, for the sake of uh, being alongside all these things, I think the way that he connects those with the different elements of temporality, that helped it make it a little more clear. Although keeping track of it all is very difficult. But somewhere there's a chart that just shows all these tripartite things of basically you got past, present, future, and then you got all these structural elements of Dasein that correspond with all of them. But trying to figure it out and is difficult. But anyways, yeah, the temporality is ecstatic outside itself. So any one modality is outside itself and connecting through its activity of constitution, it's temporalizing of itself with the other modes of temporality. So the future is always connected with this past and the present with the past and the future and blah blah blah, past with the present and the future. And all those things together form the unity of Dasein's being, which is care, which is the ontological meaning is temporality. Amen. Blessed be.
So wait, let me see if all right, Magic Man with your funny words. I think let me see if I've got it. All right, good now. I'm from the South, so you're gonna have to go slow. I'm a little slow on the uptake. So I think if I understand it correctly, I think you've answered the thing that I was just reading from. The temporality temporalizes itself as a future which makes present in the process of having been. I can understand, and again, maybe this is just me, like because I'm so brainwashed by the Greek tradition that I'm going to be rephrasing this into like simple little building block baby terms that are totally improper. But what that paragraph reads to me as, then, given what you've said, the way that I can make it make sense, temporalizing does not signify that ecstasies come in a succession. The future is not later than having been, and having been is not earlier than the present. You could say this. Tell me if this is true, that Heidegger might agree with this. Particular events in a timeline that is founded or oriented around the commonplace notion of time, which he says is mostly just totally, you should throw that out. But if we are thinking about a timeline of typical understandings of time, the common sense approach to time, in that context, it would make complete sense to say that the future is later than the present, future events are later, and the present is later than the past, and the past is earlier. That's where it would make sense. But in this case, he's talking about the sort of ever-present formal force. Again, I seriously, I might be rephrasing this into like erroneous language, but the sort of ever-present, ubiquitous formal force, and presence of a past, future, and present, as they relate to a Dasein. And all of these things, past, present, future, and the Dasein itself, if my understanding is correct, they are all sort of equiprimordial, because I would imagine that temporality, much like the world, is not there without a Dasein. And so the Dasein, the world, and the temporality that is the constitutive formation of concern or care, whatever. All of those things are equiprimordial, right? I don't know.
So this, I just posted this sentence that comes, it's on the very next page from that sentence you read. This is on Heidegger 351 at the beginning, relative, like in the second paragraph of section 69. Only in terms of the rootedness of Dasein in temporality do we gain insight into the existential possibility of the phenomenon that we characterized at the beginning of our analytic of Dasein as its fundamental constitution, namely being in the world. And so it's that kind of language that makes it sound like temporality is like a transcendental condition for the possibility of being in the world, which is, I don't know, is the fundamental constitution of Dasein. And so that's why it sounds to me almost like temporality is like a transcendental condition for the possibility of Dasein to be. Anyway, that's it seems like that's a possibility.
I was coming across the same question. Like it does seem like in moments Heidegger seems to make temporality prior to Dasein, and it seems in other moments it seems Dasein is what temporalizes in its being with the world, and so it seems that Dasein and it kind of it seems more like in these times it seems to be more heavy on I guess the Kantian note, whereas time is a form of intuition that the subject brings. It does. There seems to be Heidegger seems to be speaking as if temporality is a mode of being with that Dasein brings to the world. So it does. But I want to say that there's several times in Being in Time where Heidegger does this kind of things are equiprimordial. They mutually pull up by the bootstraps left and right. You know what I mean? Which is prior Dasein temporality. Well, they come up together. And again, I don't have a section of the text I can point to, but I'm just saying I've been puzzled by the same question, and it seems to me that Heidegger's pulling that kind of move.
Yeah. So one of the key things that he said, I think it was maybe like 2 readings ago or so, when he was talking about meaning, and he says that meaning has to do with the conditions of possibility. So I was like, okay, that kind of makes sense, If I say something is the meaning of something, it's conditioning it. Okay, let's go with that. So what he says is that, okay, so you got Dasein, you got Dasein's being. Dasein's being is care. And then the meaning of care is temporality. So the conditioning of Dasein's being is temporality, which is also, though I think it is Dasein's temporality. Or is that right? I guess that is. Yeah, because so I think that's why, or that's sort of the order of conditioning that's going on there. That temporality is what primordially unifies Dasein's being, and that's kind of its act of temporalizing itself is that, and that's what constitutes it as the care structure, which still is that kind of tripartite thing of thrownness, the having been, being alongside entities within the world, the present, and then understanding, projection, being ahead of itself. Yeah. So, and those things, that's what's equiprimordial or equally primordial, is that those 3-partite kind of structures that he talks about, the items in those are what are equiprimordial. And primordiality has to do with this unitary aspect. And also is kind of the way he usually talks about the sort of conditioning and meaning of things also has to do with this kind of unitary aspect to it, which also sounds very Kantian. Although what he's doing is very different from Kant. But Yeah, that's I don't know. Does that answer the question? I can't remember what the question really. Oh, Hunter, what you're saying about kind of like succession and whatnot. So I think this would maybe clarify some things. So what he's arguing against is that, or at least this ordinary conception of time instead of temporality, which is what he likes to talk about as this kind of like primordial, the meaning of Dasein's being special thing, which is not a thing, but yeah. So temporality, its emphasis is more on the future in the sense that its being is oriented towards possibility, where the ordinary conception of time has to do with this giving this emphasis to the present and succession in the present. And that's what he's going to argue is derivative from the more primordial temporality of the all this stuff that he's talking about. He's going to say that that's what's primordial, and then from there you get this derived notion of world time as succession of present experiences. And I think okay, so in this reading he talks about, well, sort of this question that he touched on way before, but then kind of left it hanging. How does this present at hand stuff come about? So he really gives his explanation. I mean, it's still not clear to me exactly how this occurs, but I see kind of at least like what he's at least trying to do. I mean, it may just be me that I'm just like too stupid to like figure it out, but so he's giving this kind of like this explanation of the genesis of the present at hand, objective presence from out of the ready to hand dealing Dasein's concern or taking care of things, entities within the present, being alongside those things. That's concern with the ready to hand and all of its environmental context and all that good stuff. That's what is prior to this attitude that can then come about where you then treat that as present at hand through this kind of unready to hand kind of thing that he talks about way earlier. When things become conspicuous because they're missing. So when the ready to hand is missing or something like that, that's when you get this transformation of a theoretical attitude and you can treat things as then present experience, present objects, objective objects, the capital O.
But
I think he's going to do something like that with time as well, and talking about, well, you got this primordial aspect of Dasein's temporality. How from that do you get the genesis of this derivative world time of succession of presence?
But
sorry, David, you were saying something?
The scientific view is not necessarily connected to objects or to objective presence or the present at hand. I mean, he makes that. I was trying to find that place where he says that the essence of what it means to be a scientific or to be a scientific view is not necessarily tied to present at hand objects. Because, and I can't, I'm looking for the passage, but he says you can have a science of something like, what did he give as an example? Some kind of historical something that is not treating objects as present at hand, but is nevertheless a science. And
the history of, I think he's talking about like biographies, someone's milieu.
Yes.
Yeah.
It was that. And that was an example of something that is a science that is not dealing with present at hand objects. So the essence of science, it has to do, and I didn't quite catch what he was saying, but it has something to do with trying to thematize an isolated field of of beings or something. It has to do with that, something like that, isolating an entire domain rather than actually reducing a domain to present. I mean, some sciences do in fact reduce objects to a bunch of present at hand relations of present at hand objects. Some sciences do that, but if I remember right, he explicitly says, but that's not a necessary condition for a science. That's just one kind of science. There are sciences that don't do that. And if we can find that reference to the historical biography thing, I think it was somewhere around that area.
Yeah. So his thing about the science, the kind of like what is it called, the existential conception of science, is a lot of that is about this way of treating the world in terms of the present at hand. Although, yeah, it's not, you can still have a science, though, in which you treat things that are not present at hand.
Yeah.
Kind of makes sense.
Well,
I think in
here's
some
what-
ways you almost have to have some kind of translation into, that's the whole like thematizing thing of objectifying it into something that is, well, one thing. So when he's talking about the mathematical projection of nature, that's where, well, a lot of this stuff, that's the section where he's basically covering, I mean, Bergson did this, 30 years ago, but
I was wondering that to me this sounded a lot like Bergson, this stuff about math and so on.
yeah. Yeah, and the stuff where he's talking about also the two different types of multiplicities, like a multiplicity of items that are ready to hand become a pure multiplicity of locations. Yeah, very he read his Bergson. He definitely did. Yeah.
It's on page, probably what you're looking for, Nevitt, in your edition 344.
Okay.
Heidegger, towards the bottom of Heidegger 361. The understanding of being guiding the heedful dealings with interworldly beings has been transformed, but does this already constitute scientific mode of behavior if we comprehend things at hand as something objectively present instead of circumspectively deliberating about them? Moreover, even things at hand can be made a theme of scientific investigation and determination. For example, in examining his milieu, the context of a historiographical biography, the everyday context of useful things at hand. And here I take them to mean that, yeah, essentially science thematizes things in there as, X as X, which is a mode of theoretical knowing, which regards things as present to hand explicitly. But, and the point he's trying to make here, I think I'm in agreement with Chase. He's saying things don't have to be taken in the first instance as mere things. We can take meaningful things, significant things, and study them scientifically. Society, culture, art. We can study scientifically. This doesn't take away from its meaningful character, but when we thematize it to scientifically study it, we effectively render it as an object present to hand rather than ready to hand.
Begging your pardon, when you said page 3, was it page 366 or just the notation 366 on the side of the page?
It's on 354 in the
344 in the Stambaugh.
yeah, 344, and then yeah.
Oh, 344, page 344.
Yeah, and Heidegger 361, I think is.
So the way I took that, maybe I'm putting too much in one sentence. Moreover, even things at hand can be made a theme of scientific investigation and determination, which I read as therefore not necessarily present at hand, which maybe I shouldn't. For example, in examining someone's surrounding world, his milieu, the context of a historiographical biography, the everyday context of useful things at hand, their historical origination and utilization, their factical role in design, all these are objects of the science of economics. I don't know how I get economics out of that. Things at hand need not lose their character of being useful things in order to become the object of a science. A modification of our understanding of being seems not to be necessarily constitutive for the genesis of the theoretical mode of behavior toward things. Certainly not if this modification is supposed to mean a change of the kind of being, which, in understanding the being in question, we understand it to possess. So I thought he was saying there that you could have a science of whatever this is that didn't necessarily render present or render ready to hand things as present at hand, but that you could study a whole domain, because he uses words like the everyday context of useful things at hand, their historical origination and utilization, their factical role in design. All these are the objects of the science of economics. So I mean, what are you doing then? I guess at this point I'm uncertain. I thought the implication of that was that you could have that science wasn't necessarily dependent on treating objects as present at hand, that you could have a science of, but what you do then when you do that is you have a science of a region, something like that, like a region of things ready to hand. And it was that thematization of an entire region and treating it as an object of study. So you sort of objectify an entire region rather than all the things within it. But maybe I'm wrong. I'm not sure. Because I mean, what I was trying to get at, what is the essence of the scientific approach? And I thought that section was saying, well, it isn't just that things are rendered present at hand, but that there's something else that's the essence of a scientific approach. But
Yeah.
I'm not sure about that.
Yeah, I agree with that. There seems to be something more than, but I want to say that it seems to be kind of an essential characteristic of the theoretical mode or the scientific mode is that things are approached as present to hand. And as you know, just kind of in the background as well, like I don't know how well this fits or if this is accurate, but I was thinking about again, he uses the hammer, right? And how the hammer might be too heavy, regarded in certain respects, too heavy as part of its inner worldly context of, you know what I mean, or just too heavy because it doesn't balance out this scale where I you know what I mean, or whatever theoretical scientific reasons that we. So he focuses on a hammer. In one context, you might regard it as heavy, too heavy, and then another one we just regard it as heavy, you know, as having mass. And what struck me was, you know, again, I think it was Dreyfus who said, you know, it's when we encounter problems that we suddenly jolted out of our contexts, our everyday, meaningful, you know, heedful circumspection. That when something goes wrong, and then we have to investigate, you know, and in the investigation, we then approach these things as present to hand. So the same object, the hammer, can be regarded as an inner worldly thing or as a present to hand, depending on our mode. And it seems to be like there has to be a problem, you know, some kind. I think this is why it's fitting into the temporality section. It fits into, you know, something that is frustrated in its awaiting, you know, or something is found to be missing, you know, that we are awaiting. So there is another element, and I just throw this out real quickly. Around the hammer, right? I would think of it like, again, if you could think of the hammer in the context of the art of carpentry, then you have kind of a praxis an inner worldly approach to the hammer. However, if you think of the hammer in terms of the science of carpentry, then when we think of the hammer as a different kind of object, right? From the attitude of the art of carpentry, and then from the attitude of the science of carpentry. You can study carpentry either way, and probably maybe want to do both if you want to be a good carpenter. You know what I mean? But yeah, there's different ways of approaching this very hammer. And I think one of the things he's trying to say is when we approach it scientifically, we do it this way, and it's usually in response to a problem.
But I think and maybe you're not saying this differently. I was thinking that he said like the too heavy and the too light is still within the domain of the ready to hand, right? Whereas when you start talking about its mass and how much it weighs, then you've broken out and now it's an object present at hand.
Right.
Wait. I wanna wait a minute. I have a question. Oh, maybe even several. But okay. This is something I was thinking about. And maybe I have sort of a pedestrian response to something that Heidegger says here, but it's directly relevant to what we're talking about, and it's on Heidegger 356, which is near where we've been dealing with. On Heidegger 356, he talks about this set of conditions and it's in line exactly with what you're saying, Nevin. And I'll go to the exact on 356. 356 starts in the middle of a paragraph. The end of that paragraph, the second to last sentence of the first paragraph of 356, that is fascinating. It's fascinating to me. So I'm going to just read that. That which one has not reckoned with does not get forgotten, it gets retained, so that in its very unsuitability, it remains ready to hand. So now this just presented such a massive formal problem to me. And maybe I'm missing something. I feel like I have to be missing something absolutely crucial. Because if my understanding is correct, which I know it's probably not, this statement, that which one has not reckoned with, and blah, 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 it gets retained, in its very unsuitability, it remains ready to hand. I immediately asked myself the question and wrote it down as a note here. I thought that precisely unsuitability to my equipmental context was the de facto benchmark of a present at hand thing. It was like the indication that something is present at hand is that it is not a part of it has broken out of my equipmental context. It has shown itself as conspicuous because it doesn't fit, because it isn't fluid, because it interrupts my flow, because it's not familiar to me. I don't know. You see what I'm saying? Am I, because you can, and let me just, I have one more sentence. Just and you can see, Eric, maybe what I'm saying, if what I'm saying is true, which I can see from, it's like, probably not, but you could see where I'm coming from when I say, if my reading of present at hand versus ready at hand is correct, that would mean that this statement that Heidegger is outlaying, it would imply, and I know this is not actually true, but just based on my mindset, my framework, from my position, it seems like it's true that literally nothing can ever be present at hand ever. And the only way that things can ever be present at hand is through like a sort of manual like shift in perspective or something like this kind of I gotta kind of consciously jerk myself into this present at hand context. And I'm right, and I agree, Nevin, too heavy is unsuitable. Broken. Oh, you're saying so there's a difference between unsuitable and out of, because if I'm I don't know.
Yeah, so
I think
let's say you're doing some job, like you're in your carpentry thing, and you're trying to hammer something. It's like, God, this is too heavy, and you just kind of throw it and grab the other hammer. You haven't. It's not now. That thing is. It's not. It's still in a sense ready to hand, but in its unsuitability because it was too heavy. And then you pick up another hammer that is just right and you keep hammering. So that kind of unsuitability that it just doesn't quite fit the current job. You can still be, I mean, I kind of think of it, you're enmeshed in this activity and it's like, throw that thing over there and then grab this other one and you just keep going, as opposed to like you're hammering and the handle breaks and you're like, well, fuck, this hammer's broken. And now it's completely broken out of its, at least, I don't know, it might be possible for even a broken hammer to still remain unsuitable. But I think it's more likely that if you have something that is dramatically, I don't know. I'm kind of struggling here too. Maybe it's like the degree of unsuitability or something like that, when it completely breaks it out of the context of the usability context of usability. Somehow it just kind of ejects it out of the entire context.
But I thought, the way I was reading it was like, let's say it's unsuitable. I wasn't looking at it as a dichotomy between unsuitability and broken. I just thought, and again, maybe this is wrong, but I thought broken, unsuitable, stupid, ugly, stinky, whatever we want to call it, that is also a part of the context, because the context is the equipmental context I have is definitively defined, that was redundant, but is defined by the things that are not in it. And so the very things that are unsuitable, broken outside of my equipmental context, they are a part of that equipmental context. I reckon with them as not data, bad, wrong. I'm a carpenter. I don't know about hydrodynamics. So whenever I look at hydrodynamic equations or whatever as a carpenter and installing like a pool in somebody's backyard, somebody asked me a question about it, I don't just think that is a present at hand thing that's outside of my equipmental context. I think that's a thing outside of my equipmental context. And my whole eternal, ubiquitous 24/7 operation is always eternally in a state of an equipmental context. And literally everything in the entire universe is in some way connected to that equipmental context in a place. It has a place. It has a place of being. And even if that place of being is explicitly in my mind not familiar to me, it still defines the limits of my equipmental context. It still plays a role. It's still there in the equipmental context. And so if that's true for me, and I know it's not, because this would be ridiculous, or I don't know, but I'm pretty sure because it would be ridiculous, that would mean that everything, all phenomena, all presences, all beings, everything is ready at hand, or ready to hand, right? And
so think about, maybe here's an illustration that might help. Think about when some kind of designer, interior designer, I don't know if this is really what they do, but as someone's said, okay, I want you to design my living room. And so, you have a designer and they're sitting down on it with a computer, that has some sort of three-dimensional graphics thing. And they know what kind of chair this person likes. So they want this kind of chair with this kind of leg. And so they pull that one out of the library and they set it there in the virtual floor. And they want this kind of table. Oh, I can't use that table because that table's too large. It like takes too much room. And so this designer is thinking of these tables and chairs and couches and lamps as these objects that have certain geometrical and mathematical properties, as well as certain, aesthetic properties. And so this designer is thinking, I would think that that's a present at hand way of encountering these things, because they're thinking of these as objects with certain properties that have certain relations. And granted, they still have relations with one another, but those relations are sort of theoretical in a sense. So then that person designs that living room, and now you have a living room, and you walk into your living room, and you just kind of flop down into the chair, and now you're kind of laying in this recliner, and you're not thinking of the recliner as a chair with a certain geometry and certain aesthetic features. You're not thinking of it as an object that is, I mean, it's never completely isolated from this environment, but it is an object among other objects that have relations, but those relations are things that you can calculate, that you can describe precisely, and so on. But when when you're laying in the chair, you're not thinking about the volume of the chair and how well it forms to your body and how far away the table is such that you can set your coffee cup on it. You're just you're just living in the room, you're walking through the room, and that I would think that, at least it seems to me, that's the kind of difference. I don't know.
Well, I have a brief hypothetical, like a thought experiment, because that's a good example for the schema that you're working in or that you're proposing. I agree. But then it brought to mind another thought experiment. Like, let's say I tried to think of a gray area, like something in between the two almost. Because I'm not even sure right now. I think that the tentative thesis that I'm saying probably incorrect analysis is operating on is that the difference between the two is not solid, is not well enough established in my mind to make sense of a real difference. And so I see the two as only really being different based on like how you look at it. And maybe that's true. Yeah, but it's like, okay, I'll give you a weird example. When I'm working on stuff I don't do handiwork much because I'm a soft-handed man of letters, right? But when I did the last time I did handiwork of any kind was messing with my computer, like, because I'm a little computer nerd, and I spilled water on my laptop and I needed to open it. It's okay, I'm still using it actually, but I had to open it up and blow it out with a hair dryer. So when I went to open up the back of this computer, I needed a specific screwdriver size. I had my laptop on my desk with a desk lamp pointed down at it, and I had my screwdriver set directly adjacent. I popped the button open. I opened my screwdriver set with all its little bits, the screwdriver bits of different sizes and thicknesses and shapes. And I knew before, and I remember this, I knew what kind of screwdriver I needed in order to open up the screws on this laptop, because I think I had Googled it like an hour before. But I didn't look at each of the screwdriver bits and think, okay, no, that wouldn't work because it's too small. No, this wouldn't work because it's too big. And then I eventually, by process of elimination, like Goldilocks, I found the right screwdriver. I knew that the 2.0 Phillips, it was the 2.0 Phillips I needed. And I scanned with my eyes at this little plastic divider with all these labels, and I saw 2.0 Phillips. Got it. And boom, I put it in and I used it and it worked. So there was in that second, in that moment, there was a moment of me engaging with a thing in a way that I would call ready at hand. But at the same time, I was very conscious, in fact, like necessarily so, of the empirical, material, scientific, whatever you want to call them, qualities of the bit, of the metal bit. I knew based on the empirical signifier, 2 centimeters or 2 millimeters, whatever 2 stands for, I don't actually know, but it was a 2 Phillips. And I was like, that's an empirical piece of data. And I know this drill bit, based on scientific confirmation, is the proper tool for this endeavor. You know what I mean? I thought about it as an object among others with certain qualities that I analyzed within like half a millisecond and recognized that that was it. So that feels like a weird gray area where I'm in my ready at hand space in my workshop, but I'm analyzing things kind of on the fly per these present at hand, or through these mechanisms that we would identify with a relation to a present at hand object. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah. Okay, yeah. Hunter, you need like a home and garden TV channel show where you like people give you just like broken shit or whatever, and then you just like analyze it. But then you never actually fix anything. And you're always just like, well, I mean, anyways, I'm a soft-handed man of letters. So, like, what are you expecting? Like, when things actually get fixed, like watch another show,
He could give a Heideggerian analysis and a Hegelian analysis. Yeah, and that would be all the show would be doing.
Yeah, yeah. But yeah, okay, let's see. The example you were giving just now as the drill bit, I think that's a good example of kind of how they interchange between this ready to hand and the president hand. And that's kind of what he's talking about with this. That's kind of what science is about, is so I think one thing he wants to say, this Heidegger fellow, he's trying to say that the president hand actually is kind of contained also within these ready to hand uh structures of the in order to and our concernful dealings with the world and whatnot. And they're not just simply, oh well, the president hand or the scientific objectification of something through in mathematics. That's simply its own thing. It doesn't need to have some kind of, you know, dealing with Dasein and Dasein's concern. So that's what he's attacking there. And so he wants to say that, yeah, the president hand, even something like the mathematical, is there also within this context of the ready to hand. But the thing about the not reckoning with as a mode of taking into one's reckoning the unsuitability thing. So I think what he's getting at there is, as well as with this kind of like the conspicuous, how do those, work together? So when something doesn't work in my environment, that's still part of the concernful dealings in my environment, but it's kind of marked off as something that doesn't actually work. So, okay, the example I thought is you're playing some video game. It's like Zelda. You're trying to get to this one point in the map. You're trying to get through something. You try to go through one way and you can't do it. Oh shit, like what's going on? I can't get through this way. So that becomes still part of the concernful dealings with your environment, the context of it, but it's in the context exactly as something that is unsuitable. And I think that it would be like that with something like even okay, you have like the field of study that you don't understand. You can still, that's part of the navigation of your environment, but exactly as something that, well, I can't do that. Doesn't mean you have to like explicitly say that. You understand it and project your possibilities in terms of already understanding that that's unsuitable. So then that opens an, possible exploration of another path. So I think that's what he's getting at with this insuitable, is that you can mark things off as insuitable, insurmountable within your context, and that's within this ready to hand kind of thing. But then, of course, yeah, you could have all kinds of president hand things that kind of emerge within that, but are still kind of will sink back into still all those references of the context and whatnot, which are so something that is ready to hand equipment. It's got this reference to a use of it in order to, and I think that's kind of what even something like the certain mathematically constructed tools, those will still be something that you'll use within that concernful dealing kind of thing. And then you can see where there's a little different temporality going on there. Usually, just if you're doing something for some kind of purpose, that's what he's going to relate to, a kind of future. Although he's saying that the concernful dealings in our world, they have a certain way of making present in terms of, which is the kind of circumspectively looking at things in terms of in order to, for a, for the sake of, and the for the sake of is Dasein itself. That's kind of what defines Dasein as something that cares about its being, cares about itself, is that we do things for ourselves, essentially. So that would be the connected with our possibilities in the future and whatnot. And then the present at hand is this is a kind of shift in how the present is made present, where the focus is then more so just on this kind of like collapsing into, well, it's just about the present as spatial location. And that's kind of the construct of, mathematical physics and whatnot that he's talking about. A different understanding of beings that gives you that present at hand, but even that is still within a larger subsumption within the ready to hand, which is going to be just primary to the present at hand. Does that make any sense? Or maybe I used too much Heideggerian terminology there? So sometimes I like to try to translate into both translations, but I think that's just too much. This section in particular, I think is really hard. Concern, taking care of, and so involvement, I think, is relevance for the Stambau, I think. But anyways, yeah.
I sorry, I had a blue screen of death there for a minute, but largely, yeah, I'm on the same page as you, Chase. It seems like, he's presenting present to hand as kind of something that grows out of the ready to hand. The ready to hand is primary, right? And then also he makes the point, I want to say he makes the point, there is no such thing, a pure theoretical mode, like there's always somewhere something of the practical, happening behind or to the side of, which is to speak to Hunter's earlier question, like how can I ever take things as present to hand if they're always going to be encountered within a context and equipmental context and things like that. And I think that's, we start there, and that's the occasions within this equipmental context which lead us to then regard things as present to hand. But and again, I don't think Heidegger is trying to put out a strict dichotomy. Either you regard this object in its ready to hand, or you regard it in its present to hand. I think your example of the screwdriver, right, was a good example there. There's a touch of the present to hand, and that the classification, it's 2.0, like you know how to classify it, categorize it, right? But that's quite separate from its meaning in use. And when you're using it, you forget exactly, you forget about that number and that classification as such, right? But you're working through it. And so I think we're looking at an admixture. But if you want to know, like, and again, I'm thinking, I don't know, but if to my mind, if you want to imagine what Heidegger would think is a pure mode of attending where it's all pure presence at hand, I think we can take what the clues of the ready to hand and evacuate them. The ready to hand is significance, meaning, relevance, right? And then you evacuate those things and you have present at hand. And if you want to, again, if you want to push it further, and I think part of the occasion for this book, right, for writing Being in Time, is to combat creeping nihilism. And I think that's part of what he's trying to diagnose here is nihilism as a kind of a mode of regarding the world as present at hand, run amok.
stripped of meaning, stripped of value, stripped of significance.
Right.
Whereas he's saying, no, that stuff's already there.
Right. That's right. And when you regard the world as meaningless, that's a derivative mode. You're not finding it originally as meaningless and then imposing or injecting meaning into it, but more like the other way around, right? You find the world as meaningless because you've evacuated the meaning.
Yeah, that would definitely fit in with what he emphasizes later on, his essay on technology and some other things too. He was definitely interested in the way that science and technology has this certain image of being that if we were to go along with that and have it be this totalizing vision of the world, that would lead to a kind of nihilism, or that it basically has, I think. And only a God can save us now, which hopefully he didn't mean the Nazis by that, but maybe did.
So I'm hoping this doesn't drive us too far afield, although it's already after 9. But that explanation of what Heidegger's overall project is seems in some ways to be exactly the opposite of what at least I've understood some of the existentialists trying to do. So it seems I have, and again, maybe I've just misunderstood him all this time, but I think of some of the existentialists as saying, actually, the world is meaningless and vacant and void and empty. And now we have to consciously construct a meaning for it, because in itself it has no meaning and value. And so we have to choose, like I have to choose a project for myself that brings meaning to the world. But that what project I choose is, there's a whole bunch of different ones I could choose. I mean, they're constrained by conditions in the world, but I need to stake my life on some project, and then that project is what brings meaning and value to my life, which in some ways sounds like the reverse of the way you were describing Heidegger, and yet existentialism came out of Heidegger. So did I misread that as what existentialism?
No, I think so. There's some existentialism in this, in being in time, and there's some things where I think Sartre, whoever, legitimately got it out of Heidegger, and that it's like a somewhat faithful reading or whatnot of Heidegger. But then there's a lot that I think he thought he got out of Heidegger that's not really necessarily in Heidegger. And then there's some things where they are just diametrically opposite. And I think that that is exactly probably the most extreme one of them, because it's an ontology of meaning. The world is meaningful, and it's soaked in meaning, and that's how we deal with the world, and the world is kind of involved in everything. And that, I think, that kind of idea of existentialism as there's no meaning to anything in itself. It's only the kind of freedom of the subject and the individual that brings meaning through its, willful action on things. I think that was the aspect of existentialism that he really objected to.
Oh, okay.
And was just like, no, hell no.
Okay, so
yeah.
That's helpful. So I didn't misread those two.
I don't think so. Yeah.
But they're just sort of in opposition in that regard.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I mean, I think the similar things happen with Nietzsche. I think there's things that Nietzsche said that are do not fit in with a sort of standard existentialist framework, but I mean, certainly parts of it do, but some don't. So I think that's existentialism is one of those categories that it works good as a general kind of category to group some similar ideas, philosophers, whatnot,
novelist people like that. But then sort of in like the strict details, there's only a few that I think would really kind of cater to the okay, so I think Sartre is basically just like the prime, he is the image of, he's the quintessence of existentialism, and one of the few that actually was like, I am an existentialist. It is his Beauvoir, and there like maybe a few others, even like Camus is like, no, I'm an absurdist, not an existentialist and
Also,
whatnot.
I'm not a philosopher, I think. Didn't he say?
Yeah, I think you're right. Yeah, so I think and that's one of those things, yeah. So Nietzsche and Kierkegaard, I think the same thing too. You can give a kind of existentialist reading of them and have it be somewhat faithful to what they're doing, but it can only go so far before to just like simply say like, the identity of predication, like Nietzsche is an existentialist, that will almost always involve some kind of distortion of Nietzsche in order to fit the predication of existentialism.
Mhm.
So I think Heidegger's similar in the same way, except his case is maybe a little more complex because I think it's kind of like this early work is more existentialist in that kind of Sartrean way, uh, somewhat legitimately, somewhat not. But then his philosophy changes somewhat. It becomes less existentialist than it already was, even though it was only partial to begin with. So it's kind of like that. But yeah, the lots of people will read this book as existentialist and they'll just read it completely as like a Sartrean thing. And I think it's helpful to kind of understand parts of it because, that I think, at least for me, that Sartrean point of view is a little more concrete in some places, where Heidegger is kind of like, what the hell are you talking about? But yeah, I don't know. I think still we have to struggle through Heidegger without the temptations of too much Sartre, at least.
Yeah, I've appreciated times when you've sort of very diplomatically corrected my interpretations, and it's like, that's actually more Sartre than that is Heidegger. So that's been helpful. I
Yeah.
think throne and abandonment seem to be very similar with the guys, but
Mhm. Well, there's something he said about freedom, um, where he was talking about kind of what you have freedom within that that showed his distinctions from Sartre. I don't know where it is, but I think there's one thing that's kind of like the thrownness is something you don't have there's no option, there's no freedom from that. There's certain, existential structures and one of them, thrownness, has to do also with this facticity that you don't decide about that. But then he talks about how there's freedom within certain aspects of kind of like, well, which route I will actually take within these things. Some of that is open to Dasein's freedom. But yeah, let's just read the 800-page Being in Nothingness text. Oh, God. I would like to read that eventually one day.
I would too.
I don't know if I should get a new copy because mine, once again, has vomit all over it. So
Who's vomit?
that's
Yeah,
mine.
the
Yeah.
cat.
Oh, it's yours.
Was
I
it
thought that maybe
was
was
it a
the
time when
cat.
you were feeling particularly nauseous?
Oh. Wow. Damn. How did I
God.
not think of that? Damn.
Yeah, I put a note in the chat when Hunter and I first met. We were reading what is it, The Imagination or The Imaginary or something like that.
Yeah, the imaginary. Yeah.
by Sartre, and he was like Mr. Sartre at the time, and he was like, next book, Being and Nothingness. And I was like, well, yeah, I'm on board. I need to read that book too. But then Hegel got his claws into Hunter, and that was it.
Yeah,
I remember I was really into Sartre, and then while I was in there, I was like, what's this term he uses a lot? And somebody said, oh, it's a borrowed term from one of those old German fuddy-duddies. I think his name was Schlegel or Bagel or Hegel or something. And I was like, oh, really? Let's take a look. And then I saw, as soon as I followed that, somebody said, oh, Sard, he's really great. And I was a defender. I was like, I want to find people who hate him, and so I could beat them up with my words in internet comment fights. And people would say, he uses these terms, but he borrows them from these old traditions without using them in the right way. And I was like, what do you mean? Fuck you, it's not the right way. How do you know what the right way? Fuck you. And then I was like, all right, let's get to the bottom of what these jagoffs are on about my boy Jean Paul. And I did a little bit of digging, and I was like, oh, pretty quickly I was like, these are some pretty interesting criticisms, and the rest is history.
Was that words like in itself and for itself and up its own butt and stuff
Yeah,
like that?
up
So,
itself, and yeah.
yeah.
Yes, actually, it's like that schema, I guess, people thought was. And I vaguely remember participating in that conversation with internet losers like myself years ago. But at this point, I just don't. Oh God, I don't know. I liked No Exit. That was cool. I liked the book he wrote about the crabs. That was awesome. I don't know. That's my opinion now. That's as I've gotten older. It's just sucks.
I liked Nausea. I would, I don't. Do you read that?
I read Nausea, No Exit, and I remember the crab book. It was called The Condemned of Altona. And I remember what it was that actually made me start to doubt Jean-Paul Sartre. And it was I had two deep loves at the time. I was neutral on Hegel. He was kind of a potential suitor, but I was not smitten with him just yet. I was really in the mood for Sartre, and I was reading a lot of Freud. And I was like, oh, wow, Freud's so cool. And then I read this thing in Sartre where he was like, I was reading Being and Nothingness. I literally was reading Being and Nothingness, trying as a very early, like, first year philosophy student because I was stupid. And I was like, let's try. And in some of the first parts, he's talking about like the unconscious. He didn't say this, but he might as well say the unconscious is fucking bullshit, and people who believe in it are stupid, and it doesn't make sense, and it's impossible. And the only reason that people still believe in it, even though it was like 1930 when he was writing this, he was like, the only reason people still believe in that fucking delusion is because they are fundamentally wrong from the outset as to how to think of the mind and of the personality and of freedom. And I was like, whoa, dude. I was like, I was with you. We were kind of fighting the power together, man. But you're taking shots at somebody that I can vouch for. All right. What's that about? And I was like, and so I was like, listen, Sart, I'm going to need to take some time to reflect on this whole conscious unconscious thing. And that, because Sart is very anti the unconscious. And I had to work through this until I got to a point where I was like, the only reason this is actually the thing I remember. Yeah, divorce. The only reason, and I mean the primary reason that I think Sartre was so vehemently against Freud's unconscious is because I think he was operating with an assumption as to what the unconscious was or should be that I disagreed with and that Lacan disagreed with. And so I was like, all right, man, I thought you were cool. What happened? I was like, you were so cool with all this other stuff. What happened with the conscious stuff? But yeah, hey, we should read Samuel Weber's Return to Freud sometime. He's an anti-Hegelian. I think he's wrong, but Freudy doity, fruity duty. Hey man, I've actually he's on my coffee table right now, so maybe you're right. But Who knows? Maybe I made a terrible mistake that day when I abandoned the light and I surged towards the eternal night of confusion and delirium. But, it's fine. It's not that bad.
And now you're in law school. Oh my God.
Are we still taping?
Yeah, we are. I should
Yeah.
probably stop it. I've forgotten. Where is the button? There it is.